Alright, I'm back on stream here, guys. Welcome back to another Star Fox 64 Enjoyer stream. Um, I didn't follow through with last night's stream just because of the Zoran Mamdani election results. I kind of just wanted to see that for myself and see what some other commentators had to say about it. But I figured, at least in the morning here, we could go over the Ireland topic I wanted to kind of learn more about. So yeah, let's get right into it then.
A giant wall cuts through an ordinary neighborhood in Belfast, 25 feet high. On one side, a Catholic population. On the other, a Protestant one. But this wall isn't just here because of religious differences. It's here because people on this side of it want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK. And people on this side want it to be part of a united Ireland.
I'm not sure if they're going to talk about this at all in the video, but one interesting fact to think about here is they've had elections, voting basically to see if Northern Ireland should stay as a British territory or if it should be reintegrated into the Republic of Ireland. But the only people that were allowed to vote for it were landowners in Northern Ireland. So that was the only way you qualified to vote. And go figure, most of the landowners in Northern Ireland were the British settlers there.
It's called a peace wall, and there are many like it, carving Belfast up, separating neighborhoods that were once at war with each other. Because from 1968 to 1998, this was home to some of the most dangerous armed paramilitaries in the world.
Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland itself, the bombings were setting new records in horror, and an IR...
Oh, one thing that really got me interested in this topic that I thought was kind of fucked up actually was found out through my own family history, and I guess my aunt did a 23andMe thing years ago. These genealogy websites were reporting Northern Ireland as British. So when people would do DNA tests, it would just show up as them being British and not actually from Northern Ireland. You'd have to actually dig into it and see on the map where it was from, and then it would say oh, Belfast or Derry, and that would be the way you would determine it, because they were just blanketing under Britain for Northern Ireland, and they weren't even doing that with Scotland. So I think that's crazy.
IRA explosives expert received a life sentence for murder.
One you might have heard of, the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, which spent 30 years fighting for a united Ireland. The conflict was called the Troubles, and would see over 3,700 people killed and almost 50,000 injured.
Lord Louis Mountbatten, captain of HMS Kelly, admiral of the fleet viceroy of India here at Burma, murdered by the IRA. It's interesting to mention that as well. People always talk about the numbers of the Holocaust, 6 million Jews. But I think, not to lessen that effect or anything, but let's see. Yeah, 100 million confirmed Indian people killed by the British colonialism over 40 years being the confirmed number, and the total number for unaccounted victims being 165 million. So this guy here was participating in all of that. And it's interesting to call him a hero. It just kind of shows you where the priorities are with it.
3,700 people killed and almost
Like, the British Empire didn't kill 165 million combatants, guaranteed.
50,000 injured. We
That's
spoke
the
to
civilian
two men
population.
who fought on opposing sides. Michael, who joined the IRA in the 70s, and Billy, who joined the Ulster Volunteer Force, or UVF, to fight against the IRA.
This guy looks so smug, and this guy's like lived most of his life in prison.
Michael Colbert. I was in prison for almost 16 years.
Yeah,
as a life sentence
16 years.
prisoner. I was charged with various IRA-related activities, including killing members of the British forces.
My name's Billy Hutchison. I'm a former loyalist prisoner. I was in prison from 1974 to 1990. I was in for murder.
But before we get into that, you need to know about two groups that populate Northern Ireland. Irish nationalists, or Republicans, are those who want the unification of Northern Ireland
I
and
stand
the
corrected.
Republic of Ireland. They tend to be Catholics. British Unionists, or Loyalists, want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, and they tend to be Protestants. So what's behind this divide? How does it link to religion? And why is Northern Ireland part of the UK? To find that out, we'll need to cover a bit of history. From the 1100s, Britain was attempting to colonise Ireland, and it faced some of the strongest resistance in the northeast, in an area called Ulster. So the British decided they needed to Anglicise the region. 1100s, Britain. Why is Northern Ireland part of the UK? To find that out, we'll need to cover a bit of history. From the 1100s, Britain was attempting to colonise Ireland, and it faced some of the strongest resistance in the northeast, in an area called Ulster. So the British decided they needed to Anglicise the region, basically make it more English. And in 1609, they began confiscating land from native Irish residents to give to loyal settlers, who were mostly Protestants from Scotland and northern England. If settlers owned the land, they'd have more control over Ulster. This period was called the Plantation of Ulster. Fast forward to the 1900s, long after Britain had colonised Ireland. The vast majority of people here were Irish Catholics and were heavily discriminated against by Protestant British rulers. In a rejection of British rule in Ireland, the 1918 elections saw an Irish nationalist party that was pushing for independence, called Sinn Féin, win 91% of the seats outside of Ulster. But in Ulster, all those settlers that were given land hundreds of years ago had families, and over the centuries, their population grew. It was now the only region of Ireland where Protestant Unionists in favour of British rule were in the majority, winning 4 out of 9 of the counties there. After those elections, rather than taking their seats in Parliament, Sinn Féin decided to form their own separate government and proclaim a new Irish Republic. And they'd formed their own army. This was the birth of the original IRA. So when Britain tried to step in, they fought a war for independence against the UK. To try and put a stop to the fighting, Britain passed the Home Rule Act, which partitioned Ireland into Northern and Southern Ireland. The goal was to keep Ireland in the UK, but create 2 Irish governments, one unionist one in the north and an Irish nationalist one in the south. But this division was rejected by most Irish citizens.
Oh my god, guys, it's the two-state solution. Britain's done it. They've done it before.
And the fighting only stopped when a ceasefire was agreed and the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed. This agreement created a new country, the Irish Free State, but kept it as part of the British Empire. But this treaty had an opt-out clause for Northern Ireland, and with its unionist majority, within 2 days of the treaty coming into effect, Northern Ireland had declared it would separate from the Irish Free State and rejoin the UK. All this created a huge divide in Irish society and within the IRA, between those that were pro-treaty and willing.
Treaty gives Ireland a parliament responsible to the Irish people alone, a government responsible to that parliament, democratic control of legislative affairs, power to make laws for every department of Irish life, an Irish legal system controlled by Irishmen, an Irish army, Irish police force, complete financial freedom, a national flag, freedom of opinion, complete control of Irish education, complete control of her land systems, power and freedom to develop her resources and industries, a democratic constitution, a state organization to express the mind and will of the nation, a rightful place as a nation among nations. Let's see. So that was the original treaty before landowners of Northern Ireland backed out of it.
To let Northern Ireland go in return for what they saw as a stepping stone towards total independence from Britain, and those against it that wanted a united Ireland independent from the UK. So there was a civil war immediately after the War for Independence, this time between those two groups. The IRA fought against the treaty, but the pro-treaty side, supported by the British, won. And so Ireland remained partitioned as it is today. But that left a region that was still home to a lot of Catholic Irish nationalists inside the UK, living alongside Protestant British Unionists. And so the problems were far from solved.
You've no concept of the awfulness of what Ireland went through. I mean, we had this thing called the plantation and the settlers in Ireland and the planters in Ireland. That's code talk for theft, for eviction of people from their homes. How did people live? They starved to death. So, I mean, we were subject to quite horrendous treatment by the Big Island. I think ruling one country should be enough for any country. The British government has set up a false state here in the north of Ireland. So I don't use the term the UK, because the UK would mean legitimising the existence of the northern state. If I was talking about the Big Island, I would talk about Britain, because I
It's funny because British people will always get incredibly upset when you call their country Britain or England. They'll always correct you and say it's the UK.
I see this part of Ireland as being Ireland. But the actual use of the word the UK acknowledges the existence of the state, and to a degree to a republican. That's what the conflict was about. By the way, do not think for 1 minute that people like me are wanting the north of Ireland to join with the south of Ireland. We're wanting new Ireland, because we see the southern state as being quite corrupt. Do I want to get into a state where you have the same two ruling parties that has ruled corruptly under the auspices of the Catholic Church for 100 years? I don't think so.
Yeah, the IRA in its inception has been one of a socialist organization.
I think so. That's not what I spent 16 years in prison for or was engaged in military activity about. Oh no. We want a new start for the people on the island of Ireland.
We're politically and culturally British. You know, I've lived here all my life. We can talk about 600 years, we can talk about 800 years, but this is 100 years. Like, if there was United Ireland here, people here would be persecuted, people would be murdered. So if you think it's bad in Iraq or Iran, it'll be 1,000 times worse here. It may not throw LGBT people off the roof, but they'll certainly shoot and kill and persecute loyalists. And Republicans would be behind that.
Yes, that's what happens in every revolution. Anytime someone's occupying somewhere and they want freedom.
How did you
the bloodshed would be on the other side for once.
Come to be involved in the IRA in the first place?
But I was a young man in the 1960s. England was getting thrown out of their colonies all over the world. Our struggle was an anti-colonial struggle. So the tactics which they used in Africa or the Middle East, India, it's no different.
To understand why someone would join a group like the IRA or UVF and be willing to commit acts of violence in their name, you have to know a bit about Northern Ireland in the 1960s and 70s. Discrimination against Irish Catholics was rampant. Most large businesses were run by Protestant unionists, who gave preference to Protestant employees or simply refused to hire Catholics. The courts and police forces were overwhelmingly Protestant and treated Protestants more favourably, and then there was the housing. But this was more than just a place to live. You only had the right to vote in local elections here if you or your spouse owned property.
Yep, there it is. I'm glad they covered it.
Not only were the wealthier Protestants more likely to own property than Catholics, but council homes were often allocated by Protestant local councillors to Protestant families, who would then vote to keep them in power.
Yep.
Allocation of a vote
Case of not biting the hand that feeds.
depended on you having a house. And having a house depended on who got elected, because the councils allocated housing. There's a circle here, and you had to break the circle.
Yep.
So what we were pushing for
No
was
representation.
one person, one vote. You had some people, if they were big property owners, they could own 10 houses with 10 votes. Whereas you could have 2 families living in the house with a couple of adults in each family, and there was no vote.
Even though the Civil War had ended decades ago, the IRA hadn't actually gone. And against the backdrop of a growing civil rights movement, it was recruiting again. So the British government, to try and weaken the IRA, introduced a new law, giving them the ability to imprison people without trial. That process was called internment.
There are now something like 12,000 people held in camps like this throughout Northern Ireland, since the British government began its controversial policy of internment 3 months ago.
These are literal concentration camps for the Irish in Britain. I'm gonna let my cat out.
The internment was brought in August 1971. I mean, what do you say about a government which has to bring in internment? There's something wrong somewhere. Because the vast majority of the people they interned were people who they perceived as being anti-state, but they were wrong. Or they were anti-state, but not anti-state.
As the tension simmered, there were 2 camps.
So what you had was a totally reform movement for electoral changes with the civil rights movement, and you had always the little Bernie bit, which was revolution. There's a history of rebellion against British rule. It's always there, and nearly every about 20, 30 years, there's an attempted revolt. The IRA had tried to lift their military campaign in the late 1960s. It wasn't overly working.
While the IRA was trying to make a comeback, initially, most people supported the peaceful reformists. But then came a protest on the 30th of January, 1972.
On the last Sunday in January, Catholic civil rights marchers defied a government ban on parades and came into violent conflict with British troops in the centre of Londonderry.
15,000 Irish people defied a ban on public gatherings and marched against the internment law. Soldiers made arrests, used tear gas and rubber bullets, while protesters threw stones. And at 4:10 p.m, British soldiers began firing live rounds at the crowd on what would come to be known as Bloody Sunday.
1972, you had a civil rights march in Derry, which I'm sure you've heard of, Bloody Sunday, where 13 people were shot dead. Reform had to be put in the bin, had to be put aside, and to a degree, revolution took over. And I would have been one of the thousands of young men then and women who decided, nah, I'm not going to take any more of this.
And so I ask our people at this difficult and trying time to remain calm.
Can anybody tell me how this is any different from, well, aside from the land being colonized in the first place, the American Revolution?
Within the space of half an hour in the middle of the afternoon, no fewer than 20 large bombs exploded in various parts of the city.
This was a tipping point. After Bloody Sunday, support for armed revolution surged. The IRA was back with a vengeance and would undertake a 30-year fight against British and Unionist forces, becoming one of the most feared and infamous paramilitaries in the world.
RPG Avenue.
That the British government during the 1970s, it did make an effort to bring about major reform here. But the ball was already then rolling down the hill. Right? The IRA campaign was underway. Thousands of people had joined into the IRA, so it was too late. Eventually, Belfast particularly became this gated community. You weren't able to approach the city centre except you had to go through gates and be searched because of the IRA bombings.
At this
Sounds a lot like modern day Israel, where they don't let you in or out without an inspection.
stage, the forces they faced were the 8,500 strong Royal Ulster Constabulary, or RUC, which was the mostly Protestant police force in Northern Ireland, and the 21,000 British troops deployed to Northern Ireland to support the RUC under Operation Banner. That operation would last 38 years, making it the longest continuous military deployment in British history.
In areas like this, there was a lot of British forces killed. It was the conflict was mostly contained within working class nationalist stroke Republican areas. What you then had then was the growth of reactionary forces then being formulated. Those reactionary forces would have been on the pro-union side, who got their logic from attacking nationalist stroke Republican communities with this vague concept of, well, if we kill enough people in that area, those people will be telling Republicans to stop attacking forces.
I made the choices in the organisation, but there were reasons why I joined it. 100 yards from here, there was a place called the Balmora Showroom, and it was blown up. There was an 18-month-old baby killed in it. There was a boy killed in it. I didn't know at the time of the bomb, but I knew afterwards, and I knew the fella. There was a pub that was blown up called the Four Step Inn, and two pensioners who everybody in the centre knew because they were characters, and everybody knew them, but the IRA blew that up. Those are the two things that were impacting me most because they were very local and I knew people. The IRA were attacking these communities and murdering people, planting bombs, and nobody was doing anything about it. You know, British government wasn't doing anything. The police's hands were tied, and you had to make a decision then. I probably made a decision when I was 15 that we needed to do something about it, and that's how I got involved.
The two kinds of radicalization.
In all the fighting, there were over 10,000 bombings and almost 37,000 shootings. Over 3,700 people were killed and almost 50,000 injured. In Britain, the conflict came to be called the Troubles. But some of those who were involved in it...
It's so dismissive. It's just like an annoying, plucky little rebellion to them. They call it the Troubles. It's just happening outside of England.
push back on that name.
The Troubles is such a weak term.
Okay, you said it too.
Conflict, right? Which is a softish term. Others, friends of mine, will call it the war, because it was a guerrilla war. Guerrilla war in the streets, in the countryside. In England, we were also active in England. We were active in Europe. There was actually a British military man
Margaret
in
Thatcher.
Australia by the IRA. So, I mean, we consider it a war. This Troubles gives it an inference of being an internal sort of civilian throwing stones at each other. So, you know, if you'd have seen this area back, you would not believe, with armoured cars and the military personnel in it, just wouldn't believe it.
Do you regret involvement with the violence?
No, not the slightest, no. I've been asked that quite a few times by especially Americans, and I go to them, what would you have done in the 1980s if the Russians had landed? Do I regret? Absolutely not. I think I've been very instrumental in bringing about major societal change. We considered it a war, an anti-colonial war. So, no regrets. I regret being in prison. I regret the loss of life. I regret the hurt, all that type of stuff. I'm not an insane, maniacal, whatever, killer or whatever it is. We were sentenced under terrorism legislation. I didn't consider myself a terrorist. It might sound a bit...
Yeah, it would be more appropriate to label him as a prisoner of war.
But what would your views be to the French who resisted the German occupation?
What would mine be?
Yeah.
They would, I would obviously say, yeah, that it's you'd be fighting and occupying.
So would you then say to the French in 1946, do you regret killing those Germans? I mean, that sounds aggressive by me to say it, but that's the way I feel. No, absolutely justified. Why should I have a foreign soldier in my country? If you think other people aren't entitled to get rid of them, what's your nationality again?
Well, I'm English.
Yeah, you're English.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you didn't let the Germans come over. Oh, Churchill held them back on the beaches. To me, it's a no-brainer. But I understand you asking the
He
questions.
showed great restraint there.
That life had to be taken. Because I'm a father, grandfather, husband, brother. I'm an okay fella. Just was a member of the IRA.
I don't regret it, no. I don't regret being involved in the violence, but I regret every life that was taken and my action I took, and I don't regret it. And, I was denied ever, as far as I'm concerned, I had to take it. But I don't make excuses about it. I try to find reasons. But what I don't want to do is to condemn another generation of young people in this society to any type of war. I don't think circumstances are the circumstances that I was growing up in, and I think that people need to allow us to try to find a political solution.
The first of those political solutions and the transition from violence to politics came on the 10th of April 1998, in the form of the Good Friday Agreement.
After 2 years of talks and after a generation of bloodshed, an agreement that unites loyalist and Republican, unionist and nationalist leaders.
Those who believe in a united Ireland can make that case now by persuasion, not violence or threats.
Well, I look forward equally to a new era of friendship and reconciliation between unionists and nationalists.
The agreement outlined over 30 pages of terms that would put an end to the fighting in Northern Ireland. It acknowledged that the majority of people here wanted to remain part of the UK, but that a substantial portion of the population wanted a united Ireland. It was put to 2 referendums, one in Northern Ireland and one in the Republic. Turnout in Northern Ireland was 81%. And this is the moment the people of Northern Ireland learned the results.
Yes, 71.12%.
In the Republic, turnout was lower, but 94% voted in favour of the agreement. So after 30 years of fighting and over 3,500 deaths, peace at last. No more car bombs, no more pub shootings, no more sectarian killings. And the paramilitaries agreed to give up a lot of their weapons. 9 years later, Operation Banner came to an end, and British forces were withdrawn from Northern Ireland. But a lot of people outside of Northern Ireland seem to think that this solved the issue entirely. But what it really did was secure peace for now and leave the question of Northern Ireland's place in the UK open-ended. It stated that Northern Ireland would remain part of the UK until a majority of people in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland wanted unification. If unification ever does have majority support, it says there should be a referendum. It wasn't the united Ireland that Republicans wanted, and it wasn't a guarantee that Northern Ireland would be part of the UK forever, but the majority of people were okay with this middle ground if it meant the violence would stop. This political solution was much easier when the UK was in the EU. The land borders were invisible, and that meant things were flexible. People could act as though there was or wasn't a border depending on their identity. But then when the UK voted to leave the EU in 2016, it changed everything. Because this is the UK's only land border with an EU country. And Brexit risked creating a hard border here, with customs checks and security posts. Anywhere else, and that might be acceptable, but here it threatens the agreement that put an end to 3 decades of bloodshed, because it puts a barrier between Northern Ireland and the Republic, something thousands of Irish Republicans fought against. So, to try and get around that, initially the UK and EU agreed on the Northern Ireland Protocol, which moved this border, basically creating a customs barrier in the sea between Northern Ireland and Britain, and leaving Northern Ireland inside the EU single market. For loyalists, though, this threatened their place in the UK, and was likely to draw Northern Ireland and the Republic closer together while distancing it from Britain.
From the Unionist loyalist perspective, they see their connection with Britain definitely waning. Their protests about the Brexit, they wanted Brexit. They supported this very English nationalist perspective to leave Europe, which I think is very, very dangerous.
So we got the photo.
Yeah, it's basically just an English nationalism movement. So everyone's a little nervous about how they're going to treat their territories over that, I'm sure.
The people call an Irish sea border. I believe that it abuses my rights. We need unfettered access between here and the rest of the United Kingdom. The border is a Killeen, you probably went through it. It's been there for 100 years. The Irish government and all of the nationalist and Republican parties all said if there's a border there, that there would be Republican attacks on it. So they moved it. We can't live under threat from Republicans.
But since then, British politics has been kind of chaotic.
Boris Johnson is going to step down.
My friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world.
Liz Truss has been elected leader of Britain's Conservative Party and will become the UK's next Prime Minister.
For the second time this year, our Prime Minister has resigned.
I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected. I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
Rishi Sunak is set to become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
I am humbled and honoured to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
3 prime ministers in 1 year obviously leads to some changes. And so, out with the Northern Ireland Protocol, in with the Windsor Framework.
27 pages, 13,000 words. Now, it's a deal that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, or even Theresa May could not strike.
The new plan is to create 2 separate customs lanes. A green lane for goods moving between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, and a red lane for those moving between the UK and EU. Goods in the green lane aren't subject to EU checks, which should make the Irish sea border much less noticeable, meaning Unionists can breathe a sigh of relief. But it's worth keeping in mind that the Windsor Framework hasn't actually been implemented yet, and how well it'll actually work in practice is an open question.
And this video's from a year ago.
So while peace has been achieved and bullets are no longer whizzing overhead, the tension is still very much there and was one of the biggest sticking points in EU-UK Brexit negotiations. On the ground, though, today that tension is most visible in Northern Ireland's segregated neighbourhoods, where Protestants live on one side of a peace wall and Catholics on another. Within moments of entering any of these areas, it's obvious which
Not
side
the
of the divide
DMZ,
the people that live
the
there
Protestant
are on.
Catholic DMZ.
In Belfast, Catholic Republican strongholds like Falls Road and Protestant Unionist ones like the Shankill are home to countless murals expressing loyalist or Republican allegiance.
I forgot to give
like
this guy
Falls Road
a
and
nose, or the illusion of a nose.
Protestant Unionist ones like the Shankill.
Sorry, I wanted to read that. We seek nothing but the elementary right implanted in every man, the right, if you are attacked, to defend yourself.
Are home to countless murals expressing loyalty.
Interesting historical lesson here. The Palestinians actually donated a lot of money to Ireland during both conflicts, the Troubles and the Irish Civil War, and they've never forgotten it, and that's why you see such passionate defense of them now on the global stage. I think they also did that with the Choctaw Indian tribe in the United States, where the Choctaw donated money to them during the potato famine. And then like every year since then, Ireland gives them money back.
Loyalist or Republican allegiance that cover the sides of buildings. And Irish or British flags dot the streets, along with memorials marking either IRA or British Unionist attacks. The Northern Irish government aimed to remove all peace walls here by 2023. But they've missed that target.
Then.
There's still 20 miles of the structures left in Northern Ireland, mostly in Belfast. And many people have them running straight through their back gardens.
What is it like having a peace line in your back garden?
Darkens the house down terribly, but I suppose we feel safe at the same time. Well, I think everybody's glad that they're here, but I suppose it would be a wee bit better if we could get a wee bit more natural light in, you know, have sort of corrugated shields the whole way down rather than the big green things in the end. So the whole back of my house be completely dark.
I'm old enough, right, to remember when there was no peace walls. But when I walked down Conway Street and I crossed the road, right away I knew where it was. I was in a Catholic area. I mean, you don't drive through a village or a town in Northern Ireland without knowing what it is. So from that point of view, we've always had peace walls in our heads. And when you go to a peace wall, you know, you're going, all these people on the other side must be bad, that's why they've got that wall there. So you've got two factions on each side, and one thinks all the prods are bad, and one thinks all the Catholics are bad. You know, it's in people's heads, and we've never got rid of it, you know. So you can't take them down until people's got a peace of mind, and we don't have that.
It's still quite segregated, but that's what people are used to and they're living. It'd be nice to have people living all in a broadly mixed society, but we have maybe several hundred years of separated living. It's customary, but that tends to be in the working class areas. You don't get major issues in middle class or upper class areas, but you're right, in working class areas there's still major segregation.
Belfast is the most starkly divided.
The longer that they have segregated living situations, the more incredibly likely and certain it is that they're going to develop differences even further over the next 100, 200 years or so, become more distinct.
City I've ever visited. For one side, this is a fight for Irish freedom. For the other, it's the risk of being dragged into a country they don't want to be a part of. There isn't really much room for compromise beyond what's already been achieved, and both sides have taken up arms for their respective causes before. But regardless of the cause, civilians were often the victims. 54% of those killed in the conflict and 68% of those injured were civilians, sometimes targeted just for being Catholic or Protestant. Republican paramilitaries killed 2,057 people, and over a third of their victims were civilians. Loyalist paramilitaries killed fewer people, 1,027, but 85% of their victims were civilians. The British Army also killed 188 civilians, mostly Catholics, and the RUC killed 28. So while it's important to listen to those who were directly involved in the conflict to make sure history doesn't repeat itself, we also need to remember the people that suffered as a result of their actions. Michael and Billy didn't go into
We are the pilgrims. Master, we shall always go a little further.
much detail on the specific charges they were sentenced for, but Billy's case is a little easier to find online. He was sentenced to life for his role in the murder of 2 civilian Catholic men, Michael Lauren and Edward Morgan, who were not involved with the paramilitaries. I didn't find much about Michael's case, but he was involved in the killings of members of the British forces, and a book called Anatomy of a Killing suggests that he gave the order to kill Miller McAllister, a police photographer for the RUC who was shot in front of his children.
Damn.
With so many dead and injured, the bitterness here runs deep. And the trauma left in the wake of the conflict will be felt for decades to come. As things stand today, occasionally violence does flare up. There are still clashes between Protestant groups like the Orange Order and Irish Republicans and Catholics. And some splinter groups of the paramilitaries, like the Continuity IRA, are still armed.
Unfortunately, there's a small core within our nationalist areas who claim to be Republican activists but don't attack the state, but do have weaponry and say that they're against the peace process. That's up to the police to do the job, and our communities will be better off without those people. But there's an awful lot of people within loyalist areas who claim their labels as loyalist activists. They're gangsters, criminals, drug dealers, etc. So a lot of them have a lot of negative sway in their areas.
Despite those groups, the majority of people who are actually involved in the conflict have committed to the peace process and turned to dialogue. Michael now runs Kostya, an organization that provides assistance to Republican ex-prisoners, while Billy is the leader of the Progressive Unionist Party. But even so, it's difficult to know exactly what the future holds in Northern Ireland, especially now that Brexit has shaken the foundations of the Good Friday Agreement. Whatever the outcome,
It's a wild thought that 2 militants are the leaders of these particular political unions here.
one side is bound to feel like they're losing. And hopefully now, you'll understand why.
Okay, hold on. In 2022, Sinn Féin won more votes than any other political party in the Northern Ireland Assembly election. It was the first time that an Irish nationalist party was the largest party in Northern Ireland. In the 2023 local elections, parties favoring a united Ireland outpolled unionist parties by 4%. These were historic wins for Irish Republicans and brought a united Ireland one step closer. This is great news because people are voting for it now. Let's see.
It's 7 a.m. in a pretty Victorian park in North Belfast. As parents take their children to school, a steel gate is being unlocked. Every day at the same time, a warden opens these gates that separate 2 communities from each other. It's called a peace wall. Almost 25 years since the Good Friday Agreement, I've come to see how much Northern Ireland has moved on. Before I moved to Ireland last summer, I hadn't been in Belfast since 1994. I was astonished to find out that today there are more peace walls separating communities than ever before. This wall is about one of 100 in Belfast that have been built since the 1960s. The name Peace Wall sounds like a contradiction in terms. The barriers range from simple fences to towering metal walls that cut through the city's working-class communities. So I wanted to find out why Northern Ireland is having such a hard time leaving all these physical, political and economic barriers behind. To try to understand all this, I'm going to talk to people from Northern Ireland's past, present and future. Some who took up arms during the Troubles, some who were born since the ceasefire, and some who are educating the next generation. Their aim? To get Northern Ireland to stop punching below its weight. This is Belfast today. It's busy and vibrant, and it's come a long way since the bombings and terror of the Troubles. But it's still struggling with problems that are deeply rooted in the past. The linen and shipbuilding industries that put it on the map even before Northern Ireland was created by partition in 1921 have long gone. By almost any measure, today it's a region that badly lags the rest of the UK.
Part of the history of Northern Ireland has been events politically and socially have often got ahead of economic problems being addressed. And that's been the case right through the past 100 years.
Compared with the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland today is poorer, its productivity is lower, and an exodus of young people seeking better opportunities is stunting its future prospects. Researchers say young people move away because of segregation, sectarianism, and politics that they believe are stuck in the past. And then there's Brexit, which has become a hugely divisive issue in a region that overwhelmingly voted to remain. But today's barriers are not just physical. In Northern Ireland, your name or where you live can mark you out as being Protestant or Catholic. That might once have affected your job prospects. The shipyards mostly employed Protestants, for example. During the Troubles, it could have put your life in danger. Today, many people say that the once automatic reflex to identify people has gone. But not when it comes to education. Look at this chart. Students here overwhelmingly go to schools that are either Protestant or Catholic. Only 8% of schools are fully integrated.
In Northern Ireland, even education is divided. So I've come here to visit one of the very few schools that isn't.
Jude, how are you?
Hello, Jim.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
I wonder if Jesus is a Protestant or a Catholic.
Iswood Integrated Primary School in the wonderful North Belfast with a beautiful backdrop of the Cave Hill.
Fabulous.
Shall I take you around the school and show you some interesting things?
Show me around.
Maybe I should start off with telling you some of the backstory of the school. So, about 45 years ago, a group of parents, two of which are still employed in the school, met in a kitchen and had a dream, a vision, as an alternative to segregated education.
As Jim, the headmaster, explains, while the Troubles raged in the 1970s, some parents were convinced that education needed to be mixed. They managed to set up integrated schools for children of both faiths and from both nationalist and unionist communities. The first was established in 1981, but tensions were so high that there had to be armed police outside. But times have changed. People may identify as belonging to one or another tradition, but church attendance, even before COVID, was on the wane. And mixed marriage is on the wane.
Damn, so you're telling me with the collapse of newer generations being religious that Ireland is reuniting?
Rise. Jim says Northern Ireland is still grappling with hatred and distrust.
So this is the fault line. We talked about the fissure that runs through our community here, from and one community on this side and the second community on that side. And we talked about those.
Just imagining those family conversations where they're like, "Oh my God, are you a Protestant? Are you Catholic? I can't believe it." And the kids are just like, "No, I'm neither. I don't care." Like, that was one of the big sources, main sources of their entire division. And if no one subscribes to that, I guess there's just reunification at this point.
So that's the nationalist community, that's the unionist community.
Pretty much, like everything else in Northern Ireland, use very clumsy, crude language to group a whole group of people into one, pigeonhole them, and that's not only is unkind, it's usually unfair. So predominantly we have a nationalist community on this side, predominantly we have a unionist community on that side. And this was a flashpoint for a long time.
Paul Caskey from the Integrated Education Fund says that today these are safe but not neutral spaces for people from all sides.
I'm very proud to say that today we have 69 integrated schools educating over 25,000 children. And think of that ripple effect where you have 25,000 children, possibly maybe 40,000 parents and more grandparents. So it reaches out into the community. It shows that it can work. And we've demonstrated that this wasn't some sort of wacky, woolly, liberal group of people.
These kids are facing an uncertain future. When it comes to jobs, productivity and wages, Northern Ireland is bottom of the class in the UK. No wonder some people decide to leave, but some decide to come. Immigrants started to arrive in Northern Ireland in large numbers about 20 years ago to work in meat processing and the health service. Then a few years later came an influx of people from new EU member states, attracted by relatively free labour market access. But the immigrant population is still tiny, and it doesn't make up for the number of people who move away every year. A recent survey by Pivotal, a think tank, found the number one reason people want to go is sectarianism. Number two is job opportunities. Carl Frampton's way...
Hold on, I'm a bit of an idiot. Let's get a definition for sectarianism going here. Okay. Oh, like a sect, like a religious sect. Excessive attachment to a particular sect or party, especially in religion. So, Catholic sectarianism, Protestant.
I meet the 2 times world champion in Tigers Bay, a unionist area where he grew up.
This is a real, flashpoint here. Just so this is Tigers Bay, and my street was the first street in Tigers Bay, and that's the New Lodge there. A good friend called Sam, his brother Glenn got blew up at the bottom of the street with a pipe bomb.
That's why Carl's...
Hold on, there's a fucking motorcycle outside screwing up my noise gate.
His mum made him start boxing when he was 7 to keep him out of trouble. That's also how he met Catholics for the first time. Now he promotes integrated education and sees the results at home.
Damn, so you're telling me when you raise 2 groups of people together that they develop an understanding for one another? Wow. So it's almost like polarization in the United States is coming from communities that aren't integrated. Interesting.
Better place than it used to be. Northern Ireland, certainly. Belfast as well, but I think we're still at, we're my kids' generation. It needs them guys to come through. Kids like my daughter who doesn't know the difference at 11 years old between a Catholic and a Protestant.
But for some people, He admits peace hasn't brought change fast enough.
The area, if I'm being honest, it hasn't changed that much. I feel like people talk about places being left behind.
Just down the road from Carl's gym, Harry Smith and Kate Clark are trying to get opposite communities to focus on what they have in common, not what keeps them apart. It's not easy. This was a flashpoint area during the Troubles, and it's where the latest flare-up in violence happened just last year. Loyalists are already collecting wood for a giant bonfire, one of thousands traditionally lit every July to commemorate Protestant King William of Orange's victory over the Catholic King James in 1690.
Jesus.
We have communities that rely on peace walls for community safety, for feeling safe in their homes at night. What our job is to do is to try and promote and engage with those residents who aren't normally engaged with, promote peace barrier removal, re-imaging or redesigning.
But that's easier said than done. Kate lives behind steel fences here in the nationalist New Lodge estate, over the road from Tigers Bay.
And what are we seeing here?
These are the gates that close off Duncrown Gardens. These are peace gates. These close at 6, they open at 7:30, close at 6 o'clock.
And is there no other way in or out?
No.
So if you're in and you've forgotten to buy something, you're stuck?
So if you're in, you're stuck. You know, if you've been living beside a barrier for 20 or 30 odd years, sometimes 40 years, you know, yeah, it's like a comfort blanket for you as well. And it's pretty hard to let it go. You know, you have to show people that there's another possibility, another life.
In Northern Ireland, younger people don't remember the Troubles. Older people can't forget them. Republicans were fighting for a united Ireland and Loyalists to remain British. Paddy Hart has been working for more than 30 years to rebuild relationships. He says it's too soon to expect things to have moved on entirely, and Brexit is reviving old divisions.
Lots of the gains, lots of the hope, lots of the positives out of the Good Friday Agreement have come under pressure in recent years because of Brexit and the protocol and the uncertainty that they bring. And people then began to move back into the binary version of Northern Ireland. So yes, lots of progress, but regrettably a lot more to do. But also understandably, given what Northern Ireland's been through, it would be too much to expect that 25 years on, everyone would have left all of what happened behind.
Pauline Hegney used to work at the Europa Hotel, which was bombed more than 30 times during the Troubles.
Jesus.
Her husband Carl, a Catholic, was murdered because he was walking home from the pub on the wrong side of the road.
In those days in 1991, you would have walked on one side of the road going down the road. You would have walked on the right-hand side if you were Catholic, and on the left-hand side going down if you were Protestant. He was on the right-hand side of the road coming down the road, and someone was standing in just in a doorway along the gasworks wall, and as Carl approached, the gunman just walked up to him and shot him point blank range in the stomach. And when he fell, then he shot him point blank range in the back.
But Pauline, who's also a Catholic, thanked the predominantly Protestant police for taking him to hospital.
That was something that didn't sit well with some people in the community I lived. And one Saturday night, my car window was smashed and there was paint thrown around him and everything, so. And it was because I thanked the RUC, something I don't regret doing.
A lot has changed, but sometimes the old orange and green divides resurface. Like housing, her son is looking to buy a place with his Protestant girlfriend.
He's in a relationship with a wee girl from the other community in the country.
Ooh.
And
Romeo and Juliet.
She could live anywhere with him in any Catholic area. I don't know if he could live in any Protestant area.
Rigid divisions between communities can also extend to gender opportunities. But prospects for women...
Yeah, I wonder if they're even able to get a place together with that kind of sentiment going on there.
...aren't always better. Eileen
they have
Weir
to
has
move
been
to the
working with the
Republic?
Shankill Women's Centre in the heart of Belfast's Protestant Unionist community for 3 decades. Today, employment rates for women are stubbornly low.
And we're not seeing that peace dividend that we thought we would have. We need jobs for our young people coming through. We've probably about 3 generations here that never worked and never knew what work was.
Fixing that will help put Northern Ireland on a path to higher growth.
Northern Ireland has the biggest proportion of those with low or no skills in the UK, or of any region in the UK. But there's also the problem of those with higher skills. Northern Ireland has the lowest proportion of those who have a tertiary education. So that's university degrees, but also further education, those kind of vocational qualifications.
It's not just about jobs. Divisions in Northern Ireland are all about identity. Language and sport are 2 key expressions of that, and they can be political.
You see this area here, West Belfast, there are 80,000 inhabitants and 10,000 people from here were in prison.
Jake McShakish is a former IRA prisoner. He now runs a Gaelic football club. It's already considered a nationalist game, but here they play in Irish.
I joined the Republican movement when I was 10 years of age. I joined the youth wing of the Republican movement. I always had a great admiration for the generations of Irish people who had resisted British rule. And I knew that I was a captive second-class citizen in a state which was hostile to me at every level.
His love of the Irish language grew. He perfected it in prison in the notorious H blocks where 10 IRA prisoners died on hunger strike.
God damn.
Irish has long been a political football. A law to give it official status has been promised, but has still not been passed. When Jake set up his club, all he asked was that people could kick a ball and speak Irish fluently. Today, he even has some Protestant players. But identity and culture are complex.
And it's that conflation of political allegiance with cultural identity that causes a lot of problems. I mean, if you go into the Unionist or Protestant community, there are evangelicals, Adventists, Presbyterians, Free Presbyterians, non-aligned Presbyterians, Church of Ireland, all sorts of Methodists. There's one Catholic identity, but there isn't one Protestant identity. It's so multi-layered.
On the other side of the historic divide, another former fighter is trying to build bridges. I meet Robert Williamson in the historic house where King William of Orange stayed when he first arrived in Northern Ireland.
Oh my God, the pallet
Robert
burning
grew up on a
cloaks.
housing estate that was predominantly paramilitary. But now he works with loyalist communities to change some of the famous murals that illustrate the past.
We would go to various streets and we talk to individuals and families and we talk to local community groups and that. And we try and get a buy-in from them when you come to a meeting and basically say, listen guys, that wall there, when it was painted 20 years ago, it was fresh and new, but you know what? It's peeling off the wall. It's a disgrace to this neighbourhood. We're trying to rejuvenate, clean the place up. And you try to get them to see that and say, that, is this so important to you that it has to stay? Or could you have a conversation about re-imaging it?
Bill Wolsey is one of Northern Ireland's most successful business people. A self-made man, he runs a string of high-end hotels and pubs. He grew up in a working-class unionist area, but his parents were socialists.
I made it, and I haven't a clue how I made it. Some luck and some judgment, but I went over to Arsenal to play football, and that didn't work out. And I got into printing, which I hated, and then at night school, I went to college in Westminster and got into hospitality industry and loved it and made a little bit of money in England and then came back to buy a pub that was run by paramilitaries. We were able to purchase this pub and we had sort of 2 years of hell. But at that stage, Northern Ireland was very dark, difficult days, but we were determined that A, we wouldn't pay protection, and B, we would absolutely let everyone into our pub. We didn't care about religion, politics, but we did we wanted them to respect our rules. And sounds pretty obvious now, but was difficult then, let's say.
He says Brexit is one way politicians perpetuate divisions. Because of the Good Friday Agreement, most people couldn't countenance a return to a hard border on the island of Ireland. A quarter of a century of peace has reduced a once fortified boundary to this, an almost imperceptible line in the tarmac. In its place, a customs border was put in the Irish Sea.
Everybody knows here that if you appeal to the nationalist side and the unionist side, that's pretty much split 40-40. It's the 20% in the middle who absolutely are reconsidering where this country should go. And they're looking at it on the basis, what will be best for my children? Do I still feel European? How are we on social progress? And where will I be economically? It's no longer driven by orange and green.
Today, tech and service companies have relocated here. The movie business has taken off. Shipbuilding and linen have gone. And many young people are just bored by constantly harking back to history. Benji Wallace, a 19-year-old poet and rapper, tells me that for his work, the past is not prologue.
A lot of it it's not inspired by all of the conflict and the kind of division. It's about the fact that I don't care about it and it's not relevant really anymore. Not forgetting the past, but letting us learn from it, but not keep acknowledging it.
Northern Ireland's future, whether to remain part of the UK or to unite with Ireland, is just one of the many things that divide people here. Unlike all the other social, cultural, political, economic and educational divisions, it's going to take time to settle. But there's plenty of optimism too. Take Benji. Unlike many of his generation, he doesn't want to leave Northern Ireland, but he does want things to change.
I am resilient. Days turn to months, months turn to years upon years. We're all different. This wasted potential is turning our hopes into fears. This is the barrier never acknowledged, artists forced to leave. Our wee country's about to get weir if you don't truly believe in the youth of the nation. Feel our frustrations, doubts and hopes. Cut us loose from the industrial rope. Creative time bombs about to explode. We are young, but you'd better take notes. We are wild, rock the cultural boat. We are strong, keep this nation afloat. Innovate, because we're ditching your cultural rote.
All right, that's it for me this morning. Keeping them short.